we have a good one because we're going to be here in South Florida. We're going to be at an outdoor tiki bar. Screens all over the place. Good-looking girls. And it made you want to go back and turn the clock back quite a bit because there weren't the percentage of good-looking women when I was at Syracuse University it was mostly early 70s. I got there in 69. The ratio of good-looking girls to total women in the student body was nowhere close to what it is today.
Oh,
is that a fair statement?
Well, for
nowhere
you,
close.
yeah. I mean, you were in Syracuse too, so they were covered up the whole friggin' year. I mean, FSU was literally renowned, and working out was a big deal at FSU. So, like, the women were in great shape. Plus, you had FAM and then TCC. And the women were fantastic. And it's an era where people were taking care of themselves. That's the other thing, too. When you were going to college, we didn't know all the things we knew about nutrition, about exercise. People were very active. It was extremely talented, to say the least.
And you were in the sunshine, Lubie.
Yes.
As you mentioned, this was
the weather helped.
Frozen Tundra time. I mean, you were likely to pick up a girl who looked like Jerry Kramer. Just because he might be able to throw a block. We didn't get to see much. The general rule of thumb was if you didn't find somebody to shack up with for the winter at registration, you were going to be pretty much out of luck. You were going to be going to the gym in the cold and trying to play pickup basketball and maybe hoping some of the guys that were on the Syracuse team, whether it was freshman or varsity, were in the gym there so that you could get the feeling that you could have competed. And then how did Jimmy Boeheim overlook you as a walk-on for the squad? Am I still bitter about that, Lubie? Jim Boeheim, after watching my roommate and I participate in a couple of Syracuse practices against, it was a freshman team versus the varsity, said to my good friend Mike Lee, who was a big star and a foundational piece in Syracuse's return to prominence as a basketball power. And Jim Boeheim says to Mike Lee, where the bleep did you find those guys? They were no factor in the tournament. Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you. Peel yourself off the mat Monday here on the Defo Show. Jeff DeForest, the handsome gentleman there, the young guy, is one Mike Lubie Lubitz. And I would imagine, Lubie, how much room do we need? How much latitude do you need? How much time do you need to fully convey your tournament takes? Because it was good couple of first rounds games, the Thursday, Friday games. I fared very well. I got touched up a little bit myself in the second round games, but still very much alive in the one bracket I played. Now, that's of no interest to anybody because nobody cares how you're doing in your bracket. Right? People will be all over. Do people still go to the office, Louis, to do work anymore? How are you, by the way? How was your weekend? Were you as absorbed in all of this as many people were, or after the first couple of rounds of watching 16 games a day, did you say, maybe I'll go to the beach during the Florida game, which turned out to be a beauty?
That was actually one of the really good games. I kept an eye on it all weekend long. It ended up being a very family-intensive weekend, so I didn't get to do what I normally would do the first weekend and just hide away somewhere and watch all the action. I was out and about all weekend, but I kept an eye on it. My big takeaway was it wasn't as upset-riddled as we usually hope for the first couple of rounds. It was very chalky in horse racing. You can't stand the chalk. And in the tournament, I like from the Sweet 16 on the real deal teams finding their way. But the first two rounds, the best part is seeing upsets, seeing Cinderella. I don't even know who you would consider Cinderella at this point. Like all the people I thought could make a little bit of a run were sort of extinguished in round number 2. UConn made it interesting versus Florida, but in the end, the number 1 seeded Gators move on, and we're seeing a lot of 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s into the round of 16.
All right, I made a few notes here. It'll be my tournament takeaways, a rare dose of preparation for the show. Because who could remember everything that took place over the weekend? I mean, it was a 4-day visual bloodbath of watching college basketball, and while the games overlapped significantly in the first couple of days, which they naturally would have to, whether you were watching any one of the 4 channels, I believe, that are carrying the games or were carrying the games, they pretty much staggered them so that it was one after another.
Yeah.
In the second round of games as teams attempted to make their way into the Sweet 16. But clear-cut Duke, which was supposedly awarded and rewarded with the easiest path, a clear path to possibly a Final Four and a championship, far and away the most dominant of teams. But is that a forebearer of good things to come, Lubie? That would be the question. Duke, who led the regular season in scoring margin, has a 2-round differential of more than 65 points. That's only
Oof.
the second time that's happened. The first time it happened since the expansion of the tournament to 64 teams. First time it happened was 1985, or since 1985. Duke in 1999 was the only other team to do that. They did not win the championship that year. They lost that year to UConn. This is the 19th team, Lubie, with 60-plus point margin differential through 2 games. Only 2 have gone on to win the tournament.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's Bud Harrelson batting average here. Well, here's Buddy. He's struggling a little bit at the plate. He's batting 111. And so that's what, 1 out of 9? That's 111, is it not? We're getting ready for the baseball season.
Yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
you used to be able to calculate batting averages? You almost knew them as if there was just a table and you had it memorized. But, yeah, that's not an overwhelmingly favorable percentage. 1 out of every 9 teams that finds itself in this spot, which is, albeit, it's not necessarily infrequent, right? You're talking about 15 plus 25, 40
Yeah.
years. So it's happened 19 times. Half the time this circumstance occurs, can Duke go all the way? It certainly appeared to be clear cut. The only team that didn't show any vulnerability whatsoever of the teams that remained. Florida, as you said, nearly got knocked out. It took a 16-7 run towards the end of the game and 6 for 6 shooting on their last 6 shots. The Florida Gators made their way. Todd Golden nearly got knocked out. Did you see that? The post-game celebrations. I mean, we've seen guys get hurt in post-game celebrations. You've had guys lose their entire season. Remember the closer for the Mets? He got knocked out for the year in a celebration? Remember that?
Yeah.
It's happened. Todd Golden gets headbutted. I mean, if you see the video on this thing, I mean, he almost looks like it was Dusty Rhodes in there against one of the Funk brothers. I mean, just headbutts the guy. Bobo Brazil, I guess, was the guy that was most known among professional wrestlers. So, although that's an arcane reference for a lot of people, but nonetheless, the great Bobo Brazil, he was the Jackie Robinson of pro wrestling, Lubie. How is this man not more recognized? Why do I feel a certain element of guilt where I have to explain myself when I reference the great, late Bobo Brazil, who was known for the Coco Butt, which you would have to say is a very innovative move in any kind of combat sport where you just take your head and you smash it into the other guy.
There you go.
But if you see this celebration in the locker room, Todd Golden gets headbutted by one of his guys. In fact, I think it was the former FAU player. Is there a former FAU player on the Florida Gators? Might have been. But nonetheless, careful people in those post-game celebrations. All right, so the Maryland game, I needed this one desperately, Louie. It looked like they were going down against Colorado State. Colorado State was one of the 2 teams, 12 versus 5. Was there an upset lower than that? I don't think any 13 seeds or higher made their way out of the first round, did they?
No.
13 or higher, 12 versus 5. There were 2 of them. Colorado State was one of them. A lot of oddly, the odds makers favored Colorado State in their opening game, and so they were a 12 versus a 4 against the Maryland Terrapins, who I thought were a pretty good team. I don't know. This was one of those teams and one of those cases where you don't have a really solid familiarity with the team. But you've been hearing all year, yeah, Maryland's pretty good.
Yes.
So I went in on the blind there with Stevie Wonder time. My Sherry Amor. And I picked Maryland to win that second round game. I had Colorado State in the first game because almost everybody was touting Colorado State as a 12 versus 5. That would be the upset. Some that were following Bleacher Brothers, Chris Fisher was telling me several of their handicappers were screaming, McNeese, McNeece, McNeece.
I never heard that. That's interesting. Good for them.
I didn't see that at all, but nonetheless, and they got knocked out promptly in the second round, just spanked. Their coach, however, was among the first to benefit, Will Wade, who had a long tenure. He was at LSU for a while, wasn't he, Will Wade, before all of a sudden he's at McNeese?
Yeah, I mean, he went back. He failed at LSU. I think he's the one that had been. I feel like he's the one that had Ben Simmons at LSU, and he just went backwards. And lo and behold, now he's at McNeese, and now he's already found his way back to Power 5.
North Carolina State. He's going to be the coach. 6-year deal. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be there 6 years, but he's going to collect for 6 years.
Yep.
NC State money, and he did a fine job. He seemed to be a very distinguished guy. I like the approach that he had. He stuck with the team. He seemed to be dedicated and devoted. He was sobbing after the loss by McNeese in the second round, much like Danny Hurley was. Hurley seemed to be moved. I've been seeing a lot of Danny Hurley stuff on TV. Jeremy Schaap does a good job when he did that E60 thing, which was kind of a takeoff on HBO Real Sports. It wasn't as good or well produced, but it was well produced, but it wasn't top notch like HBO Real Sports. Would you agree with that? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, for sure.
It was like the poor man's HBO Real Sports. HBO's
Yeah.
Real Sports had better photography, better editing. I don't know about necessarily better reporting. The reporting was fine on E60, but did a great job. Jeremy Schaap's a pretty good storyteller, no doubt about it. Remember, we used to ridicule Jeremy Schaap. And we had Frank Miramonte, the track announcer at Saratoga and Santa Anita, did the original impression of Jeremy Schaap on a show I was doing many years ago. Calls me one day and he says, "Hey, you ever catch this guy, Jeremy Schaap?" And of course, the only thing we knew about him was that he was the son of the great Dick Schaap.
Yep.
And you thought, okay, there's some blatant nepotism. This guy gets a job and he's right away at the top of the journalistic field there, working for ESPN. And we always did a takeoff, or Frank did, of Jeremy Schaap's sign off. Whenever he signed off on a story, he would say, "Jeremy Schaap, ESPN."
Yeah, he always dragged out the end very far.
He did that thing like out of the Stern movie, where Big Vomit was saying, "I want you to say WNBC." He kind of had that. It was a natural thing, and he couldn't be any nicer of a guy. I've mentioned this a couple of times where I was at a Met game with my friend Ira, the Met fan, dragged me to a Met game, and I think this might have been at Shea, could have been Citi Field. Anyway, and we're sitting right behind Jeremy Schaap, and he could not have been any more delightful. People were coming up to him the whole time. He couldn't have been any more accommodating. He's sitting, talking to everybody. Just seemed like a solid, down-to-earth guy for a guy that had a fairly large media presence and was highly recognizable to most people that were sports fans. Did a good job, though, with this Danny Hurley story. I'm watching it last night, and it had been on many times before, and there's a lot of Hurley stuff swirling around now. Because what's better than having a guy who's brilliant at what he does, but happens to be a nutbag?
Yeah.
This guy's crazy, flat out crazy. And interesting things happen to him to maybe formulate the persona that he exhibits today and the personality that he displays. But I don't know. I mean, how far gone is this guy? Where does he ever have a moment of just clarity and sanity where he seems to be grounded for even a split second? Danny Hurley, he was extremely emotional and, of course, highly critical of the officiating in the UConn-Florida Gator game, as the Gators, typical to what we see of a championship caliber team, that they usually have to survive some kind of a scare. Almost always comes in one of the early rounds, first or second round. And then once they do, they are largely capable of getting it together. I don't know. What did you see there, Lubie, in the UConn? Oh, did you catch the UConn-Florida game? That was one that I saw the least of. I
didn't get to watch a lot of it. I kept an eye on it because of my hatred for the Gators, and was excited to see UConn was hanging in there, and then to see them fall apart late was sort of annoying. Look, the UConn. It's why I thought their bracket, the Gator bracket, was one of the tougher brackets. They've gotten a little help because the only double-digit seed that exists is in their bracket, because as people are calling it, the Pasta Bowl, Calipari in the end took out St. John's and Rick Pitino, and that was a team that I thought was really going to give Florida trouble because of how good their defense is, and I thought they'd find enough scoring. They're not there anymore in that region, so I don't know. What you said makes a lot of it feels very Florida. Like Maryland, I think is an interesting team. People have liked Maryland all year, but I don't know the way they struggled versus Colorado State. And I thought, honestly, I think if they play a little bit better defense on that last shot, the guy covers the Queen kid all the way to the end and then gives him space as he's shooting it. It was the weirdest way to.
But you didn't want to foul him. That would be the thing.
I get it, but he gave
that was not an easy shot.
No, it was not easy, but he gave him a clear look. And that's the one thing you don't want, is you don't want that. He literally was on him until the last second and then gave him a clean look at the backboard. Now the kid traveled. I think he took like Giannis steps, and that's become a big controversy.
27 steps.
Yeah, looking at the
traveling was not prominently called by the officials. Yep. In the tournament. There were many examples of key buckets where the guy took several steps. I mean, not even a Euro step. And you know my feeling about the Euro step.
I know.
And I think you feel the same way.
I actually agree.
That you could traverse an entire continent and not get called for walking if you were going to go by the basis in which the Euro step is officiated. which it's an abomination to a basketball purist like me, where you were calling 3 seconds in half-court games, and you were calling people out for traveling, and yeah, my eyeball, what are you talking about? Knee walk. Was that the one rule in all of sport that you played recreationally that was most often challenged?
Yeah, you would call travel. You didn't call a lot of fouls. If you were calling a foul, there better be like blood for you
Yeah.
to call a foul. But someone walking, you would call regularly. You didn't let people travel. That's why it bothered people like us so much to watch people in the NBA and even college get away with it so much. It's the only thing we ever took seriously was traveling.
Rick Barry was talking about that at that luncheon I emceed, and he's mentioned it many, many times. So also that if you were allowing the kind of traveling that players get away with today in college and the NBA when he was playing, my God, I mean, everybody would average 60 points a game. It was ridiculous. I thought that shot and that play was fairly well defended. I did not think that was any gimme. A fadeaway bank shot by a guy. This wasn't a guy who had like 50 points in the game when it was in the rhythm of scoring. I think he had something like 15, 16 points.
He's a freshman
Clean.
too. He's like a freshman. So it was a tough shot. It was just annoying because I had Colorado State winning that game, and just to have them even in it was miraculous. So I was like, shoot, they actually made a game winner of their own. Don't make this. God dang it. And then it went down, and I was like, okay. It was a good shot. It was just, I don't know. It made me feel like Maryland's ripe to get sort of pushed around by Florida. Like, I don't know if
they looked dead in the water in that game. I was on the phone with a friend of mine because I needed Maryland desperately. I got touched up, like I said, a little bit in the second round. So I had a big rooting interest in Maryland. And it seemed impossible that they were going to pull out the victory in that game. And then all of a sudden, they started cutting into the lead a little bit. A kid makes the shot there for Colorado State, three-pointer, dead swish, beautiful clutch shot, 3.6 seconds to go or something in that neighborhood. It might have been. And when the timeout was called, 3.6 seconds to go. So enough time to get off a shot, but you're thinking it's not going to be a great shot. Queen, as you said, travels across, travels across the entire state that he was in. But nonetheless, I thought it was fairly well defended. I mean, he ended up having to take a fadeaway bank shot like he was Welter Still.
Yeah.
And managed to bank that thing in. That could have gone anywhere, that shot, and ends up being the end of Colorado State's somewhat Cinderella run. And Maryland now moves on to face Florida, where do you sense maybe that Florida is going to come back and just annihilate Maryland in this game? Well, what do you think?
Yep. I as someone who can't stand the Gators, the bracket opens. I mean, now a lot of people like Texas Tech, so maybe Texas Tech can push them. Like the professor loves Texas Tech, and Drake was another team that I thought could be Cinderella-esque, and they just totally controlled that game from start to finish. So maybe Texas Tech can push them. It's just I don't know. I don't know if Texas Tech. Look, Arkansas is becoming one of those weird teams that's putting things together, and I think Florida will manhandle Arkansas. Like Florida did really well against the SEC teams that were supposedly good. So to me, as someone who's trying to see Florida get tested, if not defeated, Texas Tech has to come out of the game. I don't know if they will. Arkansas is sort of pulling it together at just the right time. Like the way that they were able to get past St. John's was annoying. Like I really wanted to see St. John's do some things, and to see Arkansas really they didn't push them around. It was interesting for a lot of that game, but like for most of the second half, you knew what was going to happen in that game. So it just feels
St. John's lost. Go ahead.
It feels like Florida's going to get a nice little run here, which is annoying as a Gator.
The St. John's loss was a little bit like the last episode of The Sopranos, wasn't it? Where a great story, a great series of stories all year long. Rick Pitino being hailed. He's on with Jimmy Fallon. He's on with all of these different podcasters. He's brilliant. He's a great, great speaker, a very inspirational guy. Also seems to have found a new, gleam of happiness, hasn't he? We were talking about that the other week where you're looking at body language and you're saying, do you see Rick Pitino in these post-game interviews? Have you ever seen a guy look more euphoric and yet at the same time realizing that, hey, man, I really got lucky here late in life. Many things have happened to him. He's always been successful anywhere he went. He certainly doesn't need the money. We've seen Rick Pitino's pad down here in Florida. It's definitely could be on one of those shows like Cribs. and has places all over the place. He plays golf all the time. He owns racehorses. He made millions of dollars with Golden Sense, the racehorse. So this is a guy that's wanting for nothing. His son was doing great. That New Mexico game was an excellent ball game last night, as New Mexico was hanging extremely tough until the very bitter end against a team that I needed to win that game also, Tom Izzo and Michigan State. Izzo had some great quotes in the post-game interviews by coaches. These basketball coaches are as colorful as it gets. Calipari after the pasta ball, and that assessment was nailed by the great Jim Larinaga, who joined us a couple of times last week here on Bleacher Brothers, and he said, look, and I thought it was just a death knell for St. John's, the way that he put it, because when you hear these two things, and you love the whole aspect of Lou Carnesecca and the occult and the fact that he had resurrected this program that was dead for the longest time.
30 years.
Long time, right? Now, so they win the Big East regular season. They win the Big East tournament in dramatic fashion. Now they come out, they win their first game, and they have this smothering defense. But Jim Larinaga was saying, hey, look, they're bricklayers from three-point land, and they're lousy free throw shooters. So what did them in the Arkansas game? I mean, you can't be any worse. Now, what did you think about the controversy? Of course, 3 for 17, St. John's best player. Pitino puts him on the bench with a lot of time left and then leaves him there.
Yeah.
Then in the post-game press conference, anyway, Pitino did not want to answer the question directly about why he had benched this player, and sort of dodged it by saying, well, you saw what happened. But was there something said? I mean, would you not? Was this a reverse John Starks, where Pat Riley probably should have put John Starks on the bench, or at least stopped going to him as his go-to guy for scoring? Did you think there was something more there? Did the player maybe say something to Pitino that pissed him off? I'm not sure.
Sure. Look, he was not playing well, and Pitino trying to shake him up. But my problem is when you do that, so put him on the bench for a little bit, like. But
and you have to bring him back because nobody else was making any shots.
Yeah, they couldn't score. Like all the issues that people said they had. Like they couldn't make a shot. They're horrendous
from the free throw line.
Horrible from the free throw line.
My dog was yelling out, "Brick!"
Yeah, and Arkansas,
he knew that a brick was coming.
And Arkansas had a lot of athleticism, so like people said, it wasn't a great matchup for them. Like you put him on the bench, have him wake up, and then put him back out there. Like you can't just let him like.
You have to throw your best player on the floor at the end of the game, don't you?
Especially when things aren't working. Like, again, it's why a lot of people down here have been questioning Spoelstra, because the Heat will get these leads into the fourth, and Spoelstra, even though they've lost like 20 fourth quarter leads, keeps going to the same rotation in the fourth quarter. It's like, dude, we know you know what you're doing, but switch it up, god dang it. Like, if something's not working, switch it up. So fine, take him out, wake him up. But if your team's struggling, put him back in. Like the pride, stubborn thing with coaches gets annoying at times. Look, Malcolm Butler makes a play of the game, but remember in that Super Bowl, he didn't play like the whole first half.
Yes.
To this day, no one knows, but he made the play of the millennium. So it sort of got swept under the rug, but he was like their best corner at the time for a secondary that was struggling in the Super Bowl versus a really good offense in the Seattle Seahawks. And he's not playing the whole, and to this day, but at least they went back to him. Eventually went to him and he makes a play of the freaking, one of the
saves
best
Belichick and Brady from having one less ring.
That's like, I get these older coaches, and we like Pitino, and Pitino's a guy that is inventive and a guy that is creative and a guy that literally was ahead of his time with the three ball. Like, if your main dude's struggling, okay, so sit him for a little bit, but you can't, like, he was out for a long time and they kept talking about it. Like, when the announcers start talking about it is when you know, dude, like.
Oh, they made a big storyline of
it. Put him back in.
Going to a shot of the player on the bench and Pitino, and because nothing else was working, I would have been inclined. And sometimes you bring somebody in off the bench, your star is struggling, and the guy lights it up. Kind of like a Lynn Sanity thing when Carmelo went out. And Jeremy Lin was lighting it up for the New York Knicks, and you were thinking, geez, I hope this guy, not that he was replacing Carmelo in the lineup, but his playing time was going to be severely compromised, and was once Carmelo Anthony came back into the system, and that was a quick and sudden abrupt end to Linsanity, which really never carried itself any further at any other point. What did he do? He went to the Rockets after that as a free agent for a lot of
Yeah,
money.
he bounced around and made a nice living off of like a 2 to 3 week run.
Of a 2-week span, yes. Which a lot of these guys are doing right now.
That's
So,
fine.
yeah, and yeah, many things. But I thought because nothing was working, unless there was something else there, some underlying thing between the coach and the player.
Yeah, but even
I
then,
thought you had to throw him back out there and at least take a chance that he might find his stroke again. Plenty of shooters have struggled in ball games, but they're still great shooters. And while they may be 3 of 17 from the field, if the rest of your team can't make a basket, can't buy a basket, throwing up air balls, and as I said, bricks from the free throw line, don't you want your top scorer back in the game? As it's getting away from you, which it did at the end there with Arkansas. Calipari overlooked Arkansas because they started their SEC season 0-5.
yeah,
They had various
massive injuries
Yeah.
is what's been the big story. And if they're not fully healthy, they're as healthy as they've been in a long time. And I guess you're seeing that. Like this Brazil kid is helping them out a lot.
Yeah. Calipari, after the game, says that they had us in our coffin, but they forgot to nail it shut.
Yeah.
So that was a great quote. The coach of Maryland after the game said that Queen came in the huddle. He sort of asked his players, "Hey, who wants the ball?"
Yep.
And Queen said, "Give me the MF and ball."
Yep.
So you like that, and you especially like it if you're a coach and it works.
Yeah.
So they move on, and that was great. Kentucky also with a couple of impressive victories. Kentucky now, and this is interesting, Lubie, because I didn't realize this. Kentucky and Tennessee, of course, have met a couple of times, and Kentucky's 2-0 in those games. And they didn't have their complete lineup in there against Tennessee. So they have the Volunteers' number, if you will, if you don't mind me. Can you allow me one extremely boring and mundane cliche? Probably out of several of them. Is that a rules violation for a talk host?
No, it's
overly encumbered with cliche. But they beat them by 11. They beat them by 5 during the regular season, Kentucky, with a lineup that was somewhat compromised by injury. So an interesting matchup there. But we'll get into that. There are a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of other things going on. I was shocked, too, on Friday night after watching a lot of basketball. I went out to a show at the Funky Biscuit, a great show, a band called Dumpster Funk out of New Orleans, which, are you familiar with Aaron Neville and the whole Neville brothers? Of course, Aaron Neville became very popular. I forget who the woman was that he did the duet with, but it was great. It was, I think, a theme from the movie. Yeah, a great singer. I mean, and the Neville brothers are extremely influential. I mean, they would be as influential in music in New Orleans as the Mannings are.
Oh, wow. Jeez, okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how many brothers there are, but it turns out Aaron Neville, I didn't realize this. I haven't seen much of him of late, and maybe there's good reason. He has a 65-year-old grandson that leads this band.
How old's Aaron Neville?
It's Ian Neville is the guy that's the band leader of this band, Dumpster Funk, out of New Orleans. Tremendous. I mean, just brilliant musicians. They were absolutely fantastic. But the reason I bring this up is because my buddy Joe Casale, you know Joe, of course.
Yeah, of course.
You've seen him around. He's one of those guys that is constantly on his phone, even though he's paying full attention to what's going on. Sort of like you, Lubie, which is great. There are certain people that just have to do that because of their job or whatever it is that they're endeavoring to do, where they're constantly receiving messages and this and that, buy, sell, buy. And so he's on his phone, and we're in the middle of the show there, and he passes along the information that Big George Foreman had checked out. And that came as a complete surprise to me because I hadn't heard anything about George Foreman being in any sort of bad shape. I had been talking, and we had him on a show that we did with A.J. Johnson and this was interesting because Randy Gordon, the commissioner, was on a show with us on our interview show on Tuesday, Conversations, and he brought Jerry Cooney onto the program. And as a guest, because he does a Sirius satellite show with Jerry Cooney, gentleman Jerry Cooney, who, of course, fought Foreman in the Geezers at Caesars. And if you watch that, particularly brutal knockout. Now, both guys were well past their prime. And Jerry Cooney, who distinguished himself very well as being a tough customer, but against the elite of the elite, wasn't necessarily in that category. I think that's a fair statement, and I don't believe I'd be insulting Jerry Cooney, if he came on a show and I said that to him. Would you say it to his face, Lubie? Stephen A. Smith breath?
Probably not.
Cooney was telling us that Foreman was the hardest puncher other than his wife that he ever faced in his life. But I was talking to the commissioner, and he was telling me that Larry Holmes, oddly, was sort of in deteriorating health. So I would have been more inclined when Joe passed that information along to me. I thought, well, what are you saying? What do you mean, Foreman? Larry Holmes is the guy that's not in good shape right now. But would you think this is kind of a news judgment thing, Lubie? I don't know. If you were ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports coverage, this might be a question for Chris Visser, right? He's more inclined to be thinking along these lines. But I know you have a vested interest in women's college basketball. Mm-hmm. But do you lead with women's college basketball, which illustrated my point? Maybe they're catching up because there are more teams capable of administering these type of beatings over the competition that they faced in the first round. But how little interest could you have in something if you were starting to get any kind of level of intrigue off of the Caitlin Clark momentum and now Juju Watkins, a great player. I mean, as you're watching a woman play basketball, you'd have to say, well, I wouldn't want to face this girl, would you?
No, she's legit.
Would you play her one-on-one for money? Unless you were willing to lose a lot of money.
Exactly. She kicked my ass.
She really has the kind of game that you look at and you go, my God, the women's game has come a long, long way.
Yep.
But how uninteresting is it when every game in the first round is a 50-point blowout? 50-point blowouts. 7-point blowouts.
Yeah.
It's a disgrace. So ESPN leads, of course, they have a huge vested interest. They're trying to compete. CBS is blowing them out of the water there as ESPN is televising the women's tournament. Now, albeit it's probably not the financial bloodbath that it might have been in the past.
Yeah.
Because interest has been increased in women's sports in general, and especially women's college basketball. Mm-hmm. But would you not, if George Foreman checked out, but would you not make that the lead story? What do you think? It's a death, it's an obituary, but was he not a much bigger and well-known figure? And the fact that he passed, but without anybody having, I mean, I would imagine his immediate family might have known that there was something going on there. But had you heard anything about George Foreman being in ill health?
No, I hadn't heard anything. He was in his 70s, but again, he was a guy that had cleaned his act up after winning the title versus Moore. With the Foreman grills and whatnot, he'd gotten in much better shape. I mean, I hadn't seen him in years. Like, he had that run in the 90s where he became a big deal with the Foremans. And then the last, I'd say 15 or so years, he sort of went out of the main consciousness, but I hadn't heard anything bad about him. I mean, I would have broken away to talk about it. I don't know if it's the main story. Like, the tournament's going on, and
but they started with the women's tournament, not even the men's.
Oh, that's weird.
It seemed a little self-serving to me. I understand you have money up, and you have an investment in trying to promote this stuff, and it's probably done. How interested could you be in watching these games? How could you watch one of those games wire to wire?
I haven't watched one.
When UConn's up 70 in the first half.
Our friend Sarney loves it and wants to talk about there's two tournaments. There's not. There's one. The women's tournament exists. People watch it. That's fine. But I mean, I don't think I've watched it since like the late 90s, early 2000s. I know last year with Caitlin Clark at the end, I guess I caught some of the the game versus UConn just because they made that such a big deal with Beckers versus her and all that.
There was an excitement level there. Yeah, Angel Reese and all of that stuff too.
I like the year before, whatever. That's fine. I personally didn't really get much into it. To do that is stupid. I mean, you're just being like heavy-handed. Like, people know what you're doing when you do that. Like, the men's tournament's on. Yes, and it actually has been one of the more boring men's tournaments. I'm not gonna lie. You had the game yesterday with Maryland and Colorado State came down to the wire. The UConn Florida game came down to the wire. Thursday and Friday there wasn't really a lot. Even the ones that were upsets, they were upsets the other way. Like, they were pretty wide margins. The games just weren't scintillating. I'll give you that.
You did have teams that were highly regarded being challenged, though, even though they might have eventually broken away and won by larger margins. Michigan State certainly was in a lot of hot water against New Mexico in their game. And there were other games where Auburn even was challenged throughout most of the ball game that they played to get to the Sweet 16. Yeah. So you did see challenges made, but in the women's tournament, you saw none of that.
Yeah, no one cares.
What you saw was my theory being illustrated and verified and validated, Lubie, that The problem is the overall lack of depth. Where in the men's game you can take, and even in some of these games where it might have even been a bludgeoning, you were looking and going, "My God, this team has talent." Whereas you couldn't see that in the women's game. It was the clubbing of seals throughout most of the early rounds.
Look,
Action.
I'm a Florida State fan. Florida State has one of the best players in the country. Tania Latson, I think, is like a top 5, top 10 player in the country. They won by 40. I found that out right now. Like just by, okay, what did Florida State, and again, I'm a Florida State fan through and through. I've watched their softball games. I've watched their women's soccer win multiple championships. And I can't get in.
I'm sorry, Jim Sarnia. Nobody wants to see this.
The men's game's going on right now. Why would I get it today? There's nothing. So maybe I would sort of watch it because there's nothing on a Monday, but I don't know. I'm not trying to denigrate them. I know people get into it, and that's cool. Like, you do have some stars in the Juju Watson, and Beckers is still there in UConn, and that's fine. It doesn't break. Like, it was Caitlin Clark thing was like a random thing to have it try and be almost on equal footing with the men's. To try and do that again this year, I think is disingenuous, and I think it's stupid. Like, you're force feeding it. Look, if it's later on in SportsCenter, fine. To have it at the beginning, like, you're pushing it down people's throats, and I think that's dumb. Like, no, people know that this isn't the most important thing going on right now. They just do.
I'm thinking Casey Kasem. You want me to ignore this so I can do a death dedication? Foreman was big, though. He wasn't quite the universal persona that Muhammad Ali was in terms, and he would be the first to say it. He just became a very humble figure, and that after being probably
scary.
You would have to say that early George Foreman was among the most ferocious forces in all of sport and all of sports history. He was one of those guys like Mike Tyson in the early days that literally you could see the stain in his opponent's pants at the stare down when they were giving the instructions.
It's a sport of big men, and wasn't his nickname Big George Foreman? Like, it's a sport of big, scary men, and wasn't that like his name? Like, he was just a scary dude when he was young. Like, he was ferocious.
Didn't say much. Just quietly. I mean, he sort of had a little bit of Sonny Liston in him, except it wasn't quite as his background wasn't quite as checkered as Sonny Liston's, but nonetheless, I mean, you got a guy you dragged out of prison and happens to be managed by the mob. It wasn't Foreman, but Foreman became a very likable. I mean, it couldn't have been any more of a beautiful figure. And so I thought they kind of shoved that into the background a little bit. Although they did do the tribute. And what am I talking about?
No, Foreman. Look, the winning over Michael Moore.
Would that not have been the biggest story?
I would have started it just because he won with Moore, so it brought him to another. Like, my generation got to see him, and then the Foreman growth was huge in the '90s into the early 2000s. The Foreman
became an entrepreneur
everywhere, and he made tons of money. So he I remember him like hosting this and hosting that, and I get it's been a few years now, but like, his passing was a bit like the professor sent it out in a text. I was like, oh crap. Like, that was just another one where he was an icon, like, between boxing
and unexpected. One of those things, a news item like John Feinstein's passing. And we've had a lot of these of late. Unfortunately, Junior Bridgman, John Feinstein, Oliver Miller, who has a punchline of every fat joke that I've ever used on the air, talking about overweight athletes, unfortunately passing away. And George Foreman, and then on a lesser level, but this guy was a very exciting fighter, and during a time when boxing was always on network TV, was a prominent feature. I had a couple of great bloodbath type of wars with Ray Boom Boom Mancini, who was the popular guy at the time, but also passing away, Livingstone Rossi Bramble, who I met a couple of times, called a couple of Bramble fights later in his career, and you talk about a guy that had a weird style and a weird type of game, but was outstanding at what he did. This guy was all of that. He had a T-shirt with a slogan on it that I will never forget. I used it as a motivational thing because he's from St. Croix. He has that island mentality, Livingstone Bramble. So he had a T-shirt. I wish I had one, Lubie, and it said, "Time has come." Sounded like something that Bob Marley would say. Was that out of a Bob Marley song? Time has come.
That's for Bob Marley.
That's Marley-esque. I mean, very reggae-esque. And I use that to motivate myself at different junctures where you're thinking, oh, okay, DeForest, get off your ass. Time has come. And I'll never forget seeing that. So our condolences and to the fans of Livingstone Bramble, which probably have thinned out over the years because he hasn't been around boxing for a while, but passed away at like 64. So that was another one. Heat snapped their losing streak, Lubie. We'll maybe get into a little bit of that because Jimmy Butler returns to town. What should the reception be for Jimmy Butler? We'll get into that a little bit. And the Miami Open should not be ignored. Mira Andreeva, who was going for the Sunshine Double, which was accomplished last year on the women's side by Danielle Collins, who's still alive in the tournament, and now has to face Arina Sabalenka, the world's number one, who's playing lights out so far here in Miami, has produced some surprising and startling upsets, the Miami Open. And Mira Andreeva goes down yesterday to a woman, and this is always a weird thing where an athlete comes back from some form of depression and or mental health issue. So there's a girl, Amanda Anisimova, who actually hails from here in South Florida now and has been around South Florida for a long time. Was rising to prominence. Was an extremely talented junior, maybe one or two in the world as a junior tennis player. Came on the scene and was doing well, started to distinguish herself very well, then ran into a slump. Left the game for a couple of years, Lubie, much like Naomi Osaka, who's still alive in the tournament. Left the game for a couple of years because she was suffering from tennis burnout. Has come back now and had a winning effort in a tournament earlier this year in 2025 and knocked off Andreeva in 3 sets. So the Miami Open producing some scintillating results as well. And there you go. The women's action. Why am I talking about women's tennis before I even mention
the
men?
women's tennis is
because their game right now is as significant as whatever happens on the men's side. Maybe not quite as fast, but right up there. I mean, lacking for nothing when it comes to power and strategy and digging deep and the kind of stuff it takes to make you think, wow, that is a real champion. All right, we're going to come back with more. Jeff DeForest, we got Mike Lubie Lubitz here on the Defo Show. We'll come back with more in a moment. Now that. And we have, of course, the matchups established here, which I think Lubie is going to dissect. Are you ready for that, Lubie?
Sure.
The upcoming matchups. Are you going to cheer Jimmy Butler? We'll come back. It's 8:43.
Hey, folks, Tony Segreto here. Let me ask you a question. What do you look for when you go out to eat? Good food, obviously. Friendly atmosphere, not too loud, but good energy, reasonable prices, and a place where you feel comfortable. All those ingredients, no pun meant there, are hard to find unless you're talking about the Texas Roadhouse. You see, they encompass all of those attributes. Really, really good food, amazing atmosphere, good for a family, good for a date, or just a night out for yourself, and prices that will make you extremely happy. Their ribs, unmatched. Steaks, hand-cut every day. Everything, and I mean everything, is made on site, including their incredible bread. It's the one day, folks, that you can forget about low-carb diets. Trust me when I tell you, Texas Roadhouse, your restaurant, your destination when you say, where should we go and eat tonight?
From the newly renovated sports bar to the beautiful bayside views captured at the Tiki Bar, Jimmy Johnson's Big Chill has it all. Located at mile marker 104, the Big Chill also offers waterfront dining while experiencing breathtaking sunset views of the Florida Keys. It's simply the hottest spot in the Keys to cool off. That's Jimmy Johnson's Big Chill at mile marker 104 in Key Largo. For more information, call today at 305-453-9060.
You can't fake caring. Women can sense this immediately. You don't really care. You didn't really want to do any of this.
We now return to the Defo Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Good to be with you guys. A little recovery mode here from 4 days of wall-to-wall NCAA basketball action. It was a lot of fun, even though, as you said, Lubie, not all of the games were as compelling. You didn't have the big upsets. I don't know that we have any Dynamo Cinderella stories working right now. But nonetheless, BYU, the professor was on top of that on Friday. He was talking about how everybody shoots like Jimmer Fredette. Jimmer was there. He was kind of like Sister Jean. Why do I feel like I should give Jimmer Fredette, I don't want to say the finger. Was that the most disgraceful representation of American basketball? This is our game. It's our game. We invented the damn game, didn't we? Or was Naismith a Canadian?
No, he was American.
Well, he would be
He's
American
from the
now.
north.
Anyway,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. He's from the Northeast. He's American.
Yeah. Our game. How could we be so bad in that 3-on-3 that was introduced at the summer
That was the
games?
stupidest thing.
And Jimmer Fredette and any Barry that you had no
Yeah, get out
recognition
of here.
of were part of the team there. That was awful. I didn't really care for the way that they played the game either. Well, was it winners out? No, I think it was losers out. And then that business of taking the ball back and whether or not you had to take the ball back, that was very confusing, wasn't it? The way that they administrated that game and the rules. But nonetheless, I mean, Jimmer Fredette was horrible as a 3-on-3 player. You would have thought, wow, okay, if this guy still has his shot, we're winning the gold. But we were nowhere to be seen. We're losing to like Serbia and Latvia and anybody that had a 7-footer European guy. But yeah, I mean, BYU, they can shoot.
Yes.
So would they not remain a threat in this tournament, Lubie? Or is this the game when they go out against Alabama?
Yeah.
Do they get overwhelmed by athleticism and power that Alabama possesses? What do you think?
I had them going this far, but yeah, I think this is like this is where the chalk usually rises, and Alabama's been there a lot the last few years under Nate Oates. He may be sort of smarmy some of the things he does as a coach since he's got.
I'm not a fan of Oates after that business last.
The gun thing, he didn't chastise him for the gun celebration. He didn't even get in the middle of it when there was a lot of weird things going around with his best player, Brandon Miller, who now is in the NBA and sort of been a bust. Look, again, coming up from Buffalo, it was an interesting story, and he made Alabama relevant. But he let a lot of things slide, and has been, again, smarmy. He like, as a person, he sort of sucked. But he's had them as a prominent program for a few years now. And BYU, like that hot shooting team gets to a point, and then eventually they meet a team that's just better. And that sort of feels like this is where their road dies versus Alabama.
As a lifetime chucker, I'm naturally rooting for the team that hoists it. Come on. They're interesting. I mean, they really played well in that second game to prevail, come out on top. Kind of hurt me a little bit, but nonetheless, I think they're sort of alive. Duke dominant, and they take on Arizona. Arizona was getting crushed like a grape by Oregon early in the ball game. I had a little rooting interest in Oregon, and they're up like 19-4, something like that, coming out of the shoot. We haven't seen a tremendous number of reversals where teams come back after suffering at the outset of the ball game, where the other squad gets off to a super fast start. But Arizona eventually just ran them out of the building there. So Arizona against Duke, any shot, or is Duke a cinch to win that one? And then would they take on the winner of the BYU-Bama game? Is that what would be next for Duke?
That's the 1-2. That's the East region. I think Duke's finding. Look, the fact that Cooper Flagg clearly isn't hurt, and he's doing things that
seems fine, and he's getting support.
No one else did in Duke. Like he's only the second player ever in Duke. Like over the last 30-something years, Duke's been as talented and as consistent as any program. To have a guy like that is pretty impressive. And then the kid setting 3-point records. So you have Cooper Flagg that can do everything all over the court on both sides, and now you're getting a guy that could nail threes. They're tough. Do they win it all? I don't know. I had them in the fourth for a reason. I don't know who. Like I have Houston winning it all. I don't know if Houston will beat them in a game-on-game matchup. The fact that the thing that was going to derail them was Flagg, and Flagg's playing better than people. Like he's going for 30, 15, and 10, or 30, 15, and 5 every game. Like as a true freshman, and he's humble, and he's already sort of a leader guy.
And blends in with the team. I mean, he's not one of these guys that is going to dominate the ball.
No, he does whatever they need.
Where he's going to do a Mark Jackson and dribble out 29 out of 30 seconds on the shot clock. Tyrese Proctor, though, was really the main impetus there in this Duke blowout. 8 of 9 from 3-point range. So there's a player that doesn't get mentioned very often because of the fact that Flagg is a dominant force, but nonetheless, 8 of 9 on 3-pointers in a tournament game is still pretty significant. All right, quick perusal of the matchups coming up in the NCAA tournament. Then we'll get into a couple of other items here because I want to get your thoughts about the return of Jimmy Butler to Miami. Now, there's a possibility Steph Curry, who's been out injured, is coming back to be with the team. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to line up and play, as the Miami Heat snapped their 10-game losing streak against the weak Charlotte Hornets just last night. So sets up a little bit more of interest, at least in this matchup coming up against Golden State, and the return of Jimmy Butler. What do you think? I mean, the way he left, it was not pretty, Lubie. And it was the kind of thing that really alienates fans. And even the media. People were sick of Jimmy Butler, weren't they, here in South Florida? You couldn't wait to see this guy get traded at the point where, and now it's being suggested again, sort of a prominent story that's circulating is that players are saying Pat Riley should retire.
I mean, he's 80, so he probably will be soon. Like, I think that's dumb.
But has Riley delegated
Yes.
what authority he has and allowed other people in the organization to really be more influential in decision
Yes,
making?
anyone who's
Of course, you're going to run it by Pat.
Pat is there.
Is he really calling it?
No, is he calling the shots? Yes, that's the only thing that's true. He's calling the shots. Is he handling the day to day? No, he's not. The whole Butler thing was Butler was trying to do anything he could to go somewhere that would at least give him one more year and make the next 2 years at the highest. Next year for the Heat was going to be like 52 or 53 million. He wanted 60. And then the year after, the Heat weren't willing to give him just yet. And they would, I mean, the way he's played, even in Golden State, Wiggins has played better. Look at last night. So the Heat would not have given him that next year.
Did I tell you that didn't seem like that big of a loss to me?
No,
that Wiggins was playing well enough and was enough of a supporting player, even though Golden State has prospered since Jimmy Butler, tune of like 15-2 with him in the lineup. They may even have another win.
Wiggins was putting up the same or better numbers in Golden State.
Yes,
it may be a physicality that Butler added. Again, look, Butler was actually draining the life out of the Heat, and they were playing better when he was here. But it wasn't because of Butler. It's just a lot of coincidences going on that is making Butler look really good and the Heat look really bad. The reality is Wiggins is giving the Heat way more than Butler was giving them. They just got in a weird funk where they couldn't get out of their own way in fourth quarters. Because if you watch the games that they were losing, it wasn't like they were getting demolished. They were actually leading in most of that was the frustrating part. Yes. They were leading into the fourth when it's like, okay, even in the league of runs, usually if you have a double-digit lead in the fourth, you find a way to win 3 of the 5 games. They lost all 5, or all 10. But it's a lot of circumstance because if you watch, look, even the games where Butler's playing okay with the Warriors, you'll have Curry have like a quarter where he scores 28. They're not winning because of Butler. I don't care what people talk about the trades and this and that. That's not the reality. As a guy who a month earlier had said there's no way the Heat trade Butler to a month later saying the Heat not only should trade him, but I'm really sick of this dude that I was actually he'd become one of my favorite Heat players ever. That's how quick of a turnaround it was because of how childish he was being. And again, I'm not mad at him for wanting to get more money, but the way he handled it, even the way James Harden handled his exits was more cordial than the way Butler the way he handled his exit here was so stupid. The Pat Riley stuff was a load of garbage. Riley wasn't crying. We've heard it's all a lie, to be brutally honest. Riley's 80. He's old. The day-to-day is Adam Simon, Andy Ellisberg, Nick Harrison, and Spoelstra. That's the day-to-day. Riley is barely involved in any of it. He's barely there. He loves basketball. He loves the Heat, but he's freaking 80.
I can't stop thinking about that Hard Knocks episode with Jeff Ireland and Smoking Joe Philbin, where Ireland tells him he had just traded Vontae Davis. And was it Vontae Davis? That was the guy. And Philbin's like, oh, is that how these meetings go with the Miami Heat? I don't know. I can't picture Riley being.
I'm not saying he's not involved. This thing where they're like, oh my God, Riley, the Stephen A. Riley's going to be remembered for losing LeBron over cookies. Really? It's literally Red Auerbach and Riley. That's literally it. Phil Jackson cemented his place after Riley when he went into the front office and made the Knicks somehow worse. It's Red Auerbach and then Pat Riley. That's the lore of NBA great coaches / executives. Literally, that's it. I don't give a crap who you are. You're not going to fight me on that. So this idea, well, he's past his. Yeah, he probably is. He's 80.
Yeah, I mean, you can't necessarily knock the guy. Look, he still seems to be in pretty good shape, sharp mentally and physically, no doubt about it. All right, so I believe, is Jimmy Butler wearing number 10 with Golden State? Is that his uniform number, jersey number? Is he wearing number 10? All right. So what happens, Lubie? You're at the arena tonight, the Kaseya Center. You have tickets down there on the floor where Jimmy Butler is within earshot of you, kind of like when I used to yell at Joey Kornblit, who we love dearly, when he needed a point to ruin me, and you're just screaming at the guy, "You're a bum, Joey!" So you're within hearing range of Jimmy Butler. So he's going to hear your comment, Lubie. They announce, and starting at forward for the Golden State Warriors, number 10, if he is number 10, Jimmy Butler. Your reaction is what?
Look,
should they have a tribute video to what Jimmy Butler did?
The reality is,
and will people receive it well, or will they be soured? I mean, look, you've had this happen to you. I've had it happen to me many times, especially in affairs of the heart, where a relationship ended badly.
Mm-hmm.
You were thinking, geez, if this woman walked outside and got hit by the B bus, not that I ever wish violence or physical harm to anybody, how upset would I be? Would I attend the funeral? But time, just like it, I don't know if this is true anymore, the way the direction the country is going in with the economy, but my brother, who is a very successful guy in real estate, says time heals all mistakes in real estate. And I am a believer that time heals not necessarily all wounds, but you learn to deal with them in a different fashion. It hasn't been a lot of time for Jimmy Butler being out of here. It's not like he left during the course of the previous season and comes back.
He's handled it even since like a jerk.
He's had time to digest
his recent comments don't help. That's the problem. Is like he's doing the LeBron thing where, like, LeBron didn't say goodbye to the Heat, even though they did go to. You could say he carried them, blah blah blah, but he had his most success in Miami. He didn't say goodbye. Butler did the same thing. He left like a jerk off, and then. Since then, they've asked him, so what do you think about going back to Miami? You know, your days there. Again, this was a guy that wasn't considered a number one. Forget a superstar. When he got here, he had always been a 2 or a 3 on a team. And people really, like yourself, the professor, I was the only one I had watched a lot of the playoffs he had been involved and realized, he was the best player on those teams. He just never got the credit for it. So I thought, this could be interesting. Now, I didn't see us going to 2 finals, but going to like 3 or 4 conference finals. But I thought it was a much more interesting move than a lot of people. Most people, when he got here, he was like, okay, like he took his bar, whether it was the organization, whoever you want to give the credit to a crazy level. All right. But they asked him and he's like, yeah, there was some good times, but that was it. It's like, okay, he's not helping.
Very dismissive.
He's not helping. Yeah, he's not helping. That's
a lot of bitterness. All right, so maybe he hasn't gotten over it. Have you, as a fan, will you rise to your feet when you're at the game tonight, Mike Lubie Lubitz, and you have the opportunity for Jimmy Butler to clearly hear and understand your sentiments? Are you inclined? Well, I don't know how you would be, but I mean, in general, what do you think the reception will be? I would imagine a smattering of boos might be involved, no? Which is really something because considering, as you said, when Jimmy Butler was acquired by the Heat, I thought, okay, that's great. This guy's an asset, but they still need another piece. And that was sort of a theory throughout his tenure here. And it certainly was in play this year where you were looking, and clearly the Heat needed something else besides what they had on the roster. And that's even more in evidence now that you're watching Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero, the 2 pieces they had left that they would consider possible components of a championship caliber team or a team that maybe goes to the conference finals. And they've fallen completely apart at the seams. I mean, just an absolute sieve when it comes to being able to hang on to fourth quarter leads. But I always felt that they really just needed one more guy, somebody that could do a few of the things that they didn't really have a whole boatload of, which would be what? I don't even want to bring this guy's name up because you will fall out of your chair, but did they need a guy like Porzingis or something? Maybe a tougher version of that didn't shoot as well from the outside, but somebody that was more of an inside presence because Bam Adebayo, for some reason, hasn't fully blossomed into that and isn't out on a consistent basis. So, all right. So what do you think? Is he number 10, by the way?
I don't know his number. I can't even find him.
Oh, okay. Ladies and gentlemen, for Golden State, starting at forward, number 10, Jimmy Butler. And the crowd, goes wild? The crowd goes cold. The crowd starts booing.
I think you got it right. They'll cheer and there'll be a smattering of boos. I mean, the way he went out was really weird and disrespectful.
Popcorn raining down on the court,
It'll
people
be
throwing water bottles like it was some fight in
I mean,
Colombia.
the run he had here was ridiculous and it was unexpected and it shouldn't have happened. And it was in large part due to him. And he seemed to embrace this area and this area embraced him in a way we haven't really seen outside of Wade. Like LeBron, people love LeBron, but there was always this, but Wade's our guy. Butler, there wasn't any country. Like we bought in with Jimmy Butler, and it seemed at the time, at least, that he bought in with us. And there was a really strong love affair for like 4 years.
He was Heat culture. He was the definition. Yes, he was the epitome. He was the embodiment. He was the illustration of Heat culture. He came here because he wanted to be challenged and work like a dog.
Yes.
And have Marquis de Sade workouts orchestrated by Pat Riley from above. He is number 10. See that, Lubie? Do I know my NBA or what? Unbelievable. I watched a couple of games with Golden State. They're featured all the time because I do believe the networks are foisting Golden State upon us here because they want to take advantage of the star power and quality of one Steph Curry. We didn't mention the ex-FAU factor also. Ex-FAU factor. Dusty May, Michigan. They find themselves in the Sweet 16. John L. Davis with Arkansas. Finds himself in the Sweet 16, and there may even be some other the Vlad Golden kid.
With Michigan,
turned out to be a hell of a player, very instrumental in what success Michigan is having so far. And I think there may be a couple of other examples of from 2 years ago, the FAU Final Four team being extremely influential in what's going on in the tournament today. All right, we have a lot to talk about during the course of the week. Len Robbins going to join us tomorrow on the program, outstanding basketball expert. I'll try and bring back my friend Billy Mims, who was on our Tuesday conversation.
That'd be great.
Oh, this guy really knows his stuff. And we'll have more on the tournament throughout the week as well. Opening is a baseball season. Does it open this week or this weekend?
I mean, probably. Actually, I mean, it's the end of March, so yes.
I mean, it opened already officially with those 2 games in Japan between the Dodgers and the Cubs, but the rest of the teams in the league should be getting into action. I would think, when is the actual opening day, Lubie? How could we lose track of that? Because it's springtime, my friend, and we have just about everything going on. I haven't even touched on any NHL activity. The Panthers locally here had a win last night. And trying to figure out who has the edge there. They had gone and traveled to Washington to take on the Capitals, lost that game. And for some reason, holy Bruce Boudreau. Nobody really mentioning the Capitals as a potential NHL Stanley Cup champion. Seems like the usual suspects are always in play with regard to that. So many things happening, transpiring in the world of sports. It's going to be a fascinating week all the way around. Appreciate you guys tuning into the program. For Mike Lubie Lubitz, I'm Jeff DeForest. Stick with us all throughout the week. And we should have some fun Tuesday at 4 o'clock on our conversation show. I don't want to reveal precisely what we're going to be doing. We may be going in a couple of different directions there. Thursday is opening day, Lubie. The bunting, the smell of the grass. Do I do my usual waxing poetic about opening day?
Sure.
You cringe when I do that. And I do,
I
too.
just laugh. I just think it's funny.
Because I'm about halfway through it, and I'm thinking, well, what am I, writing Casey at the bat? What the hell is
like Casey at the bat.
That's really force-feeding the idea that you can take an intellectual approach to this stuff. Let's face it, all anybody cares about is, do I lose my bet, and where do I stand in my bracket pool? Which, by the way, I don't know. How are you doing in any bracket?
I just did one, and I'm sure it's a disaster. I was like
shredded
50. I would pull a game out of my rear. Like I got BYU, but I had Colorado State. Like Carolina screwed me. Clemson screwed me. So I have.
Ole Miss has been unmentioned on this program, and they were supposed to go down to either of the 11 seeds that they were going to face, and now they won 2 games.
I thought they'd go down in round 1, so I have not been paying attention.
That Brad McCollum, by the way, already got a job, Iowa. Brad McCollum, the Drake coach, who everybody was touting as an up-and-comer. Jim Larinaga mentioned him. Billy Mims mentioned him here on the program.
Did he just get there? So, like he went from the D2 last year is there 1 year, and he's already moving on. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Goes to Iowa, probably got a nice fat contract. And then this job will be interesting to watch among coaches, and maybe we'll see somebody. I don't know, not a lot of Cinderella-type coaches left in the tournament, but the Texas opening, Rodney Terry got fired, and fired after losing, the play-in game? So, I mean, that's a school that is fueled with oil money.
They had money before the SEC. Now they –
yes. My God. And the SEC setting records once again. What people said during the regular season has turned out to be true about the postseason as well, as they have, I think, the most ever teams by one conference in the Sweet 16. So that level of dominance held up over the first weekend of NCAA action. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. A pleasure. Peel yourselves off the mat. And we will see you guys later on. We'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Glenn Robbins, always great, will join us. I believe he's finally come back from Mexico. If he can get back to the country, we'll see. All right, very good. So that'll be a lot of fun tomorrow. Look forward to that. For Mike Lubie Lubitz, I'm Jeff DeForest. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time as we leave you now that. And maybe we should ring a bell there for Big George Foreman. Really became an extremely lovable character. And that's one of the, tradition in sport that really hits you, Lubie. I don't know if you've ever been in a boxing match when they told 10 for a fighter that they announced had passed away. First time I experienced that was at the Olympic Auditorium, and somebody had passed away, and Jimmy Lennon Sr. gets up there and says, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, would you please rise as we toll 10 in memory of the great whomever." And it's like an ominous, just a very eerie, sort of brilliant tribute. So if we had the ability to do it, we would toll 10 for a Big George Foreman. All right, see you next time as we leave you now that. I think we went through this. People are screaming, "Get out of here already, DeForest." It's 9:07.
Let's go to eat a damn snack.
Look what they done to my show.